Dark Deity 2 is here, and with it comes a huge number of new playable classes with all of their own unique stats, abilities, and passive skills. So today, we're going to go through and break down each and every one, how they function, and what kind of role you probably want to give them on the battlefield. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including my coverage of mechanics and classes and other things like that for turn-based strategy RPGs, including things like Dark Deity 2, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. We are perilously close to breaking the point of 30,000 subscribers on the channel, a huge visibility breakpoint. So if you have not yet subscribed and you do enjoy, please consider helping me get across that. It will help the channel immensely. Thank you so much. So yes, today, continuing the now kind of long-standing tradition of me covering all the different classes for turn-based strategy RPGs, as I cover them, it is time for Dark Deity 2. The first thing you'll notice is that there's a nice big censor block over the list of characters on the left-hand side, as there is some rather spoilery stuff for the late game there, as this is my endgame file. So don't mind that. I'll fill it in with like some nice art of the characters as we talk about them or something like that. Don't worry about it. I don't want to spoil your guys' experience. We're very close to the release date of the game yet, so I don't want to get too uppity with that. We're going to go through both Tier 2 and Tier 3 classes with a very brief overview of how they function, and there are actually some differences between the Tier 2 and Tier 3 versions of the same class. We're going to try and keep it pretty quick. There's a lot to go over here. So, getting right into it, we have what I'm calling the Warrior class tree. Starting off with Devoted. Devoted is a very strong all-rounder class. You can see from its growths that it has a pretty good array of might and speed, dexterity, defense, etc., etc. But what's most notable about it is it actually does not have any physical attack skills. You have Spinning Blade to give yourself block, you have Hemorrhage to make the enemy bleed, and its class passive is Executioner, giving you +8 crit per status effect on a target. So really, you have a lot of different things going on here. You want to be on the front line, you want to be attacking in melee. It is a one-range class. You want to be able to absorb hits, so you want to have it on a fairly tanky character that can become tankier with Spinning Blade. You're probably going to want to be able to deal some extra damage by putting big stacks of bleed on things, and then of course, you want to be attacking things that have status effects on them because you'll get more crit. It's just a very nice all-around brawler frontline class, and something that you'll be very happy to have on characters like Gwyn or, say, Benji to toss into the front line and just watch them go to work. The promotion of Devoted, Reaper, does a lot of the same, but it focuses a lot more on the raw killing potential of the class, with the Reaper's Mark skill granting an ally 25 crit for one turn, so you can spread the crit around if you so choose. You have your Blink that allows you to teleport a certain distance away, which is a massively, obviously very useful mobility tool. And then Visage of Death, crits deal 100% additional damage against full health enemies. This is just a monstrously powerful frontline class. Again, still a one-range class, but just the damage output you can do is absolutely insane. You're pretty much always happy to have a frontline character in this class if you choose to go with it. It's fast, it's bulky, it has great damage potential. It is a very strong option. Moving on to Nightblade. Nightblade is the starting class of Valeria and is one of your kind of rogue-like classes. It's kind of interesting that it falls into the warrior class tree, honestly, because it is definitely like a dodgy, jumpy sort of rogue scenario. But then there's also like a whole other set of classes that also features that type of thing, so it's weird. We'll get to it. But Nightblade itself is very, very strong. You have Grim Stroke, allowing you to put heavy poison stacks on an enemy, massively reducing their combat capabilities. Fleet Feet to grant an ally extra speed if they needed to get a double or not get doubled. And then Shadow Step, which increases your dodge after using your abilities, and that can stack. So, as you can probably imagine, this is a 1/1 range daggers class, and it's all about fast speed, big crits, debilitating the enemy, being extremely hard to hit, and making a nuisance of yourself in the process. You can make some pretty nasty crit builds with this. It's definitely not a bad option to have. You probably want to have at least one of these on your team at all times. Its promotion, Ancarant, does basically more of the same, although with a bit more offensive capability thrown in there. You actually have the ability to apply Vulnerable to a bunch of enemies in a big zone, which massively increases your damage output and is a great support option for you and your team, although it does cost a lot of mana. And then you do actually have a fairly nice range damage ability in Glaive Toss, where if you just can't get to an enemy and you need to put some damage out, you can just huck a glaive at him. It's like, all right, cool, free damage, I'll take it. Finally, its passive skill, Midnight Ride, gain 25 dodge while mana is below 35. This is pretty easy to do. I mean, especially if you go right from Nightblade to Ancarant, you're going to have so many different good support abilities, so many different abilities you're going to want to be using on the regular. You're probably never going to have mana, so just having more dodge when you're in that scenario, it's perfectly acceptable. Very, very nice option to have. You definitely want this to be on the front line, but don't want it to be tanking hits in the same way something like Reaper can. You want to be using terrain, making sure you're not getting swarmed too much, not getting fatigued, that type of stuff. Moving on to Seeker, the Archer class in the Warrior tree. This is a very interesting one because it focuses a lot on big single target damage, but like with buffs and different things. It's interesting. We'll talk about it. So first you have Illuminate, increases an ally's accuracy by 48 for 2 turns, a nice little support option. And then Enchant Weapon, enchanting your own weapon, making your next 3 attacks deal bonus damage. Then of course you have your passive skill, Exposing Light. Attacks apply 4 heavy vulnerable stacks. So the idea being here that you want to be able to give yourself more power so you can do big single shot damage because the class does not have very good speed. You also want to be able to buff up your allies by giving them more accuracy and kind of marking targets for them by hitting priority enemies, putting vulnerable on them, and then having your big heavy hitters come in to clean up. It's a pretty interesting support option. Obviously, it is a 2-2 range option as it is a bow-wielding class, but I do really enjoy it. I've started to use it on Gwen in my demonic run, actually, and she's been doing big damage and making those very scary demonic enemies quite a bit easier to deal with before we even get to the promotion, Ellisant, which we'll talk about now. Ellisant just doubles down on everything that Seeker is trying to do, and it does it very, very well. You get Eternal Sun, granting allies within 3 tiles plus 44 accuracy for 2 turns, so just a bigger version of the previous ability, and which can be very good, especially on higher difficulties. And then the ridiculously awesome Full Draw, allowing you to attack from a massive distance away. This is a proper sniper class, and with Blinding Light, with your attacks applying 25 heavy blind stacks, you have a lot of ways that you can debilitate the enemy from a very fair distance. The stats are largely still the same as they were. You have lower speed, very good strength, dexterity, solid defensive stats all around. These are your English longbowman style characters, and they are a ton of fun with a lot of nice support options. You'll have them in the back line. You're going to mark priority targets, probably one of the first things you're going to be attacking with in a turn, and you're going to be very happy that you did so. Finally, we move on to Gallant. Gallant is your very stereotypical frontline knight-type class, and it definitely shows it. It's got great strength, it's got great defense, usually has very good HP as well. Not the fastest, although the right character can make it a decently speedy job, and overall, it is a nice frontline option to have as well. Kind of like Devoted, it doesn't have any major direct damage abilities right off the bat, choosing to go for some more ally support instead. Call to Arms is actually a very useful ability that lets you put down a flag, which boosts ally power in the area by within 2 tiles of it, which is actually a pretty big area if you run up and drop it early and just have that boost for everyone. And it can be a pretty solid power boost as well. So this is actually a fairly decent support class. And then you have Overpower, which is unfortunately, I would say, one of the worst abilities in the game. It's basically just Fire Emblem's Shove. You can use it on your allies to get them out of or into danger. You can use it on enemies to push them away from you or deeper into your lines. And if you use it on an enemy, they get a light vulnerable stack or a few light vulnerable stacks. It's really not worth it in 99% of scenarios. I've had a couple of instances where I can do some movement shenanigans on Demonic to get a vulnerable character out of the way of a big enemy, but that's about it. Generally speaking, you're just kind of murdering your way through stuff, not really using Overpower. You then do have the passive skill Honorclad, damage +5 against enemies above 50%. This is a pretty good way to get some good alpha strikes going on. You can run in, drop your Call to Arms, get a power boost, and get the opening hit to slap the crap out of a big scary enemy, potentially kill them, and if not, severely harm them at the very least. Definitely a solid option. Not quite as much versatility as some of the other jobs here, but sometimes you just want a big dude or a big lass on the front line with a sword, you know? And speaking of big dudes and big lasses with swords, let's talk about an even bigger sword with the Champion. This is where your damage is going to be coming in from the Gallant class. When we had 2 support abilities before, now it's all about that offense. We get Cut Them Down, attack, dealing a percentage of the damage to enemies adjacent to the target, so you get a nice cleave going on. And then Push Forward for 50 mana, attack dealing the same percentage of damage as done previously, as healing to allies adjacent to the target. So if you've got the surround on an enemy and you can hit them really hard, then you'll be able to heal all of your allies in the area for what is most likely going to be a pretty big heal. The positioning here can be a little tricky sometimes, but when you can get it to work, it is extremely nice. And then, of course, you have Titanic as a passive skill. True speed, -4, but power, plus 25%. So, if Gallant wasn't really doubling before, Champion essentially never is unless you are just truly cracked on speed, but the power boost that you get from it is pretty much always worth it. This is a great frontline class to slap down in front of a bunch of physical enemies and just watch it go to town. It is pretty hysterical to see in action. There are certainly some characters that use the warrior tree that do not want to have that as an option going on. They really want their speed, but for characters like Gwyn and Benji, it is a phenomenal option. Moving on from the warrior tree into what I'm calling the rogue tree, or maybe like the Tamer, the Beastmaster, the ranger tree, whatever you want to call it, with my goat Eve here. These are some very interesting ones. This is where you get a little bit more tricky techy stuff going on, and it's quite powerful as a result. So, right off the bat, we have, perhaps unsurprisingly, Ranger. This is a 1/1 range class that definitely wants to be on the front line brawling. It's definitely the tankiest option out of the 4 in this tree, and it is pretty dang good at its job. Its pet commands are as follows. You get Lanky Spanky, call upon your orangutan to mightily slap a foe, applying 1 light stun. If you just need to make sure that something will not be taking an action on the enemy turn, this is the way to do it. And then command orangutan, attack with your pet, dealing 13 additional damage and applying 4 exhaustion stacks. This is a very, very nice option. Exhaustion is a very good way to make dodgy enemies way less dodgy. So if you're dealing with something that's causing you problems with that, you can do this to make them a bit less of a problem. You then also have Shield Stance as your passive. Falling below half health grants 8 heavy block. So again, much like with the Devoted and Gallant classes from Warrior, this is definitely a frontline brawler type job. It's got overall decent defenses. It's usually pretty accurate, has good HP, good strength. It's definitely a very solid option as well if you want to go with a little bit of a more pet command support option as opposed to status effects and block or attack boosts or the like. Then, of course, we have the Tier 3 version of it, Warden, which just looks absolutely sick as hell. Like that little, like, Sirach, I guess, cloak that you have going on. Those of you who are Elden Ring fans, you know what I'm talking about. And you do get some pretty crazy abilities here while still filling the same role. You get Sick'em for a big 100 mana. Send out your Grizzly Bear with 11 additional HP to attack your foes. So that is obviously pretty fun. And then command Grizzly, attack with your pet, dealing 18 additional damage and applying 1 heavy stun. With the Protector passive skill, adjacent allies gain 6 defense. So again, another sort of frontline tank class, but this time you have even more support options for your allies with the big defense boost, as well as the ability to actually put an animal on the board to go and to deal some problems. It's a very fun option, a very unique class in general. Highly recommend it if you're looking for a good tanky option with one of your rogues. Moving on, we have Eve's starting class Cutthroat, and perhaps one of the most busted classes in all of the skill trees when combined with its upgrade Slayer. Cutthroat is what you would expect from the name. You're going to get in there, you're going to be super dodgy, you're going to crit the hell out of everything, and it's going to be a great time. It is definitely the rogue class version of Nightblade. Now, what's nice about Cutthroat is you get a couple of different options. Licky Lasso is potentially the strongest ability in the game, allowing you to grab a unit at range and drag them to an adjacent tile. Now note, this is a blue ability, so you're not dealing any damage with it, but it also means that you are not losing your turn when you use it. And of course, you get to choose what tile they get placed on. So it is very easy to grab a priority target out of an enemy formation, yank them to you, slap the crap out of them with your knives, most likely dodge because you are dodgy as hell in this class, and then if you don't actually wind up getting a bunch of crits and killing it, which is fairly unlikely, they'll be in a prime position for the rest of your team to come in and clean them up. It is a phenomenal ability, and I've made hysterical use of it over the course of my runs. You then also get Command Giant Toad, which is certainly another nice option. Attack with your pet, dealing additional damage and applying heavy poison. Kind of like Grim Strokes, but this time you also get some free damage in there, so definitely a very strong option. Poison is one of the better status effects in the game. Always happy to see another class with it as an option. You then have the Scrapper passive ability. Every point of luck increases dodge by an extra 1. So any character that has a big luck growth, like Eve herself, is going to be incredibly difficult to hit with this class. Then, of course, we get to Slayer, and this is the first instance where we can see the direct promotion in one set of classes in a tree actually has a major change to its weapons, going to 1/2 range physical daggers, which is gross. You're just doubling down on everything that you want to be doing in Cutthroat with Slayer, but you're doing it at range this time. You get Stinger Strike, apply heavy stun to a foe, which is very, very nice if you need to just take something off the board for a turn and can't quite kill it. And then Command Wyvern, which is one of my favorite abilities. Attack with your pet, dealing 14 additional damage and applying 4 severe poison for a very cheap mana cost that you can reduce even lower. Then you get the ability Ricochet. Each attack has a 20% chance to hit again, which is just stupid. It just is so much free damage, and 20% winds up triggering a lot more than you would expect. So the Cutthroat Slayer path for rogues is one of the strongest class options in the game. I highly recommend that you have at least one character use it. Eve starts in that particular section of the tree, so it's an easy choice there. It's hysterical how much this class carried me. Moving on, though, we then have Tamer, and this is a very interesting one. I'm actually going to click over to Zanelle for this, because she was my Tamer in my initial run. Tamer is a 1-2 range bow class because it has a crossbow, so it has a very interesting little niche there. And what's so odd about it is that its overall stats aren't great. In terms of your primary stats, it's definitely the worst of the 4 in this rogue tree. However, it has massive mastery and massive HP. So you're fairly tanky, and your stats are being complemented by your mastery stat, as well as your mastery stat massively buffing all of your skills. And that's where the class really shines. Your first skill is Call the Pride. Apply 42 light block stacks, given the mastery that I have. Spread equally to all allies within 2 tiles, maximum of 21 each. And then Command Lion, attack with your pet, dealing, for me, 66 additional damage, which is disgusting. And then you get the passive skill Symbiosis. Pet commands gain an additional 25% mastery scaling, which is part of why these are so gross. Now, what's fun about this with Zanelle, this is a little bit of a nod to a future video I'm going to do about builds. You can make her a Tamer and then have her personal Command Capuchin skill that she has, and only she has, deal a massively increased amount of damage. But what's most important is if you get the kill with Command Capuchin, you get a bunch of gold. He steals the gold off of your enemies. It's the only skill in the game like this, and it scales with your mastery and other upgrades you can put on it. So you can really kind of make a disgusting amount of money with Zanelle in the Tamer class, while also being pretty durable in the process. Going on to Beastmaster, again, we are just doubling down here. Huge HP, huge mastery, kind of mediocre everything else, but it doesn't even matter. You get Hellhound Breath, apply severe snare stacks in a cone of up to 7 enemies in the area, so just lock a bunch of dudes down and make it so that they can't run at you, which is nice, or run away from you, potentially. And then Command Cerberus, attack with your pet, dealing additional damage and applying heavy block to the caster. So this is where you can really start to get into the thick of the enemy and use that huge HP stat and okay defensive stats to kind of really become a menace and counterattack literally anything that comes at you with that 1-2 range. Finally, you have the Beast Whisperer passive. Command Pet costs half mana, which is so stupid. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I never once used Hellhound Breath or Command Cerberus, even though I did use Zanelle for my entire run, because I would just run in and Command Capuchin everything and make tons of money. So very fun, very easy little synergy in there, and definitely a very fun job. Probably my second favorite in this class tree after Slayer. Finally, we have the more traditional archer in Quickdraw. This is probably going to be what you wind up taking Riordan down. It's definitely one of his better jobs, I would say, and it's pretty much a good option for anyone that falls into this sort of thief, ranger, beastmaster, whatever trait. Quickdraw is all about damage, making enemies weaker, and generally being a nuisance. You have Wicked Cackle to unnerve enemies in an area and deal light weak stacks to them. And then you have Command Hyena to attack with your pet, dealing additional damage and applying heavy bleed. Always a very nice option and can very easily finish off an enemy if your regular attack damage is not quite enough. You then get Alacrity, follow-up attacks regenerate 5 mana, so definitely something, perhaps, given the name, Quickdraw, that you want a fast character in, and Zanelle does fill that role. Then we move on to Deadeye, not, again, as much of a dedicated sniper as the Keeper tree is. Keeper is definitely more one-shot, one-kill. Deadeye is pepper you full of arrows, but it's also very, very good. You get Wing Buffet, assault an enemy with wind, causing them to be double attacked in their next combat, which is just insanely strong. You can either use this to guarantee your own double attack, make that so that like a slow ally, like a champion, is guaranteed to get 2 attacks, which can be absolutely nuts. And then you get Command Hawk, attack with your pet, dealing additional damage and applying severe blind. Great for bosses. Finally, you get Lethality. Half of overkill damage is stored for units' next attack. So, if you do huge damage to finish something off, then your next attack will deal even more damage because it gets the overkill from the previous attack. This is a phenomenal job. It's very, very fun, very Legolas coded from Lord of the Rings, and you certainly will not be unhappy to have this type of rapid-fire archer on your team for at least one character. Moving on now to the traditional mages, and I have to rep with my boy Alden. Sorry, Arthur, maybe next time. The mages are all fairly focused on dealing damage. Some of them are a little bit more defensive, some of them are a little bit more supporty, but it is definitely an overall damage-dealing class tree, and I love it to death, so we'll start with Geomancer. Geomancer is a fairly supporty job. It's got a very nice mix of stats. You can't really go wrong with it on any of the given mages, and its actual support abilities are quite nice as well. You get Star Surge, allowing you to summon an ally from some distance away and dealing damage to any enemies that were adjacent to that ally. That's definitely a little bit of a hanger-on. I like it more for just being able to shift allies around, potentially catch up allies that were doing objectives and are now kind of behind the team in terms of map progression. But when you can pull someone out of a group of enemies, like a big tanky character that got swamped, get them to safety and deal a bunch of damage in the process, it is very, very nice. Then, speaking of the ranged theme, we have Moonlight, allowing you to heal an ally within a certain range. I believe it starts at 3 at base for an X amount of health. For me, it's 31, given the stats that I have. Very, very nice ranged heal. Actually, fairly cheap, given the range that you can use it at. It's not going to be the biggest heal ever, but oftentimes it's going to be more than enough to get you out of whatever situation you're currently in. Then, of course, you get the passive skill Astral Blessing. Spending mana applies 4 light block to 2 allies within 2 tiles. This is also just a great option, just having the ability to be using your mana, which you want to be doing anyway, and making the allies around you tankier in the process is absolutely phenomenal. Also, I should mention, all but one of these classes are 1-2 range. Obviously, we'll talk about the one that is not when we get to it, and they're all magical damage as well. From there, we move on to Cosmician, one of the coolest looking sprites in the game, if I do say so myself. And this is where you're getting the truly nasty damage output. You have Astral Reckoning, deal damage to everything in a 3x3 square, which is disgusting. And by everything, I mean like all enemies, but yeah, big range damage, absolutely phenomenal. And then Meteor, which just is huge single target damage that scales very, very well. Astral Reckoning does cost a lot of mana, but you're able to hit potentially 9 enemies with it, so it should. And then Meteor is just like a great single target nuke boss killer. Finally, you then have the passive skill Imperial Magic, Mastery plus 15 when HP is full. So, yeah, if you really want to be doubling down with a character that has a lot of mastery and just start nuking enemies, take them into Cosmician and they will absolutely be doing work for you. Moving on to the Warlock class tree in Mage, and oh boy, I do love me some Green Hellfire. This is definitely going to be a more damage-oriented job. It has very solid damaging stats overall, although it is quite fragile in general. Mine is not looking here because my Alden leveled through Aegis, which we'll talk about in a second, but it made him quite tanky. And your abilities are as follows. Hellfire, allowing you to just deal damage to an enemy at range. I believe it starts at 2, and then it can go up to 4, which is just a great damage option. If you're on a character that doesn't have another damage option for like a passive skill or something like that, this is a very strong choice. And then Poison Nova, this one's fun. Just explode with necrotic energy, applying light poison stacks spread to enemies within 2 tiles. So if you literally just want to walk into the midst of the enemy and blow up and poison everything before you start throwing around fire and having your team follow up with that, you can, and it's pretty damn good to weaken a big group of enemies. Now, you might be thinking, well, if this is a really fragile class, I don't really want to be in the middle of things like that, right? Well, this is where you get to play a little bit of a game of chicken because we have Black Flame. Attacking a poisoned enemy heals the unit for the damage done. So, run in, you poison Nova, and then anything that tries to attack you on the enemy turn, so long as it doesn't outright kill you, you'll probably just kill them and heal right back up to full. It's definitely a dangerous game. There's definitely been times where I've accidentally gotten my Warlocks killed because I overestimated their ability to tank certain enemies, but when you can pop off and just go from like 2 HP to full, 2 HP to full, and be nuking enemies in the process, it is an extremely fun time. Then we have Necromancer, the natural progression from Warlock, and my actual absolute favorite class in the game because I'm a huge sucker for necromancy, and it does exactly what you would expect it to do. You can animate a zombie, creating a zombie at a certain amount of efficiency that scales off of your mastery, and then you can, of course, drain life, dealing damage and healing for the same amount. Don't even need to worry about the poison anymore. You can just suck the life right out of them, which is great. And then finally, we have the passive skill Soul Steal. Enemies dying within 2 tiles grants 20 mana. So, fragile, but you do really want to be in there, in the thick of it, poisoning enemies, summoning zombies, draining life, dealing a ton of damage in the process. This is a massively damaging job in general. It's great. It is phenomenal. I love it. It is the Necromancer. Now, moving on to what has perhaps been one of my most efficient classes, and definitely my personal favorite for Alden, it is Aegis, and this one is super cool. Aegis is the only 1/1 range sword-wielding class in the mage class tree, and it's the tank option as well. This is a physical class option. To start off, we have Relic Refraction. Apply 66 heavy blind stacks to an enemy within 2 tiles, so just really debilitate something that you're worried about clapping someone who can't take that hit. They need to be able to dodge it. And then the absolute key to this class, the best ability that it has, and the reason that it's so disgustingly strong, for 45 mana, it is Repulsor Shield. Surround an ally, yourself included, with energy for 3 turns, reflecting 15 damage every time they are hit in combat. So you can just stack this up and laugh as your tank class just reflects damage onto the enemy with reckless abandon as they try and fail to kill you. Then you also do get Reflection. Taking damage increases damage of next attack by 20%. So if they do punch through your defenses and deal some damage to you, you will also deal more damage on the clapback. And if they weren't already killed by the reflection of your Repulsor Shield, then the reflected damage that you put onto your sword to hit them with it is probably going to do the job. It is a hysterically fun class. It is my favorite tank class in the game. It looks sick, and it only gets better when we move to Relic Knight. As of course you can probably imagine, this is doing the same thing but more, and this time you now have your offense options since you got your defense and support options at the previous tier. First off, we have Blade Storm. Attack 3 times at reduced power. Now, as your mastery goes up, this reduction in power will also go down, so you will deal more and more damage as you have more mastery using Blade Storm. Then that you have Swirling Blades, animate 4 blades for 4 turns, dealing 32 damage to adjacent enemies on turn start. So, if you have the option to put this up before you start stacking your Repulsor Shield, or if you just don't even want to bother with Repulsor Shield and just have enemies blow up from the Swirling Blades, you can do that as well. Either way, you have multiple different options to be able to deal a bunch of free damage to enemies that dare to step to you. And then, of course, we do have our passive skill, Unstoppable. Killing an enemy grants +6 defense and fortitude until next turn. So, I mean, yeah, you just become an immovable wall after a certain point. And the stats reflect that as well. You've got great HP, great defense, great fortitude. Your offensive stats are obviously not great, but, like, who cares when you're just reflecting damage onto things? Like, your enemy is their own worst fear. You don't need to do anything beyond that other than contribute to some chip damage if they don't happen to finish themselves off. It's great. Finally, in the mage tree, we have the most, I guess, support-oriented of the various different classes here, and it's a very strong option for that with Scholar. This is Alden's starting class, and it is a definitely very nice one. We start off with Phase. Teleport an adjacent ally to a tile up to a certain distance away, depending on ability upgrades. Obviously, this is great for just repositioning things, throwing an ally towards an objective to capture it, or to open a treasure chest that you missed, or maybe to get them out of harm's way if they're hurt, or various different options. If you can think of a different way to use like a Warp Staff in Fire Emblem, then you can think of ways to use Phase. Then we have Ancient Writ. Read from your tome, granting an ally mana. This is one of the only ways to directly restore mana in the game. And given how many powerful abilities there have definitely been times where I've just used a character as a dedicated mana battery and just shoved them along with some insanely powerful mage or something to just fuel their spells. And it works very, very well. Then we have the passive skill Building Knowledge. Mana use raises Fortitude stat by 2 for the rest of the chapter. So over the course of a run, you will be able to build up more and more Fortitude and basically become a giant mana blocker, which is great. Just any enemy mages that try to step to you, you can no-sell, do some chip damage to them, and then having lured them in, have the rest of your team finish them off. And of course, going on from Scholar, what happens when you go through university? You've earned your doctorate, well, you become a Loremaster. And the Loremaster is very interesting. It has one direct damage ability, and it is a pretty nasty one, with the Breaker. Deal damage to all units, including allies, within 2 tiles. So basically, you just get stuck in and blow up. You just drop a Spirit Bomb on things. And if there's any allies around, well, sucks for them, I guess. So this can be a tricky one to use, especially with its high mana cost. But if you can make it work, it is obviously a ton of damage. Then we have Rousing History. Apply 19 light vulnerable to up to 5 enemies within 2 tiles. This is just great. This is just a phenomenal way to increase your team's damage output, and it's such a big area for a relatively decent mana cost. Like, you can do work with this for sure. Finally, our passive skill, Making History. Allies within 2 tiles expend 15% less mana. So yeah, Loremaster is just a through-and-through support job. It can still do some damage between the Breaker and its own natural offensive skills, but it's primarily there to gas up your other units and make things easier for them, which is fine. It never hurts to have a good support class like that. Moving on to number 4 of the 5 different class trees in Dark Deity 2, we will be looking at Saxon for the Adept tree, and this is one of the most cool trees in the game. There's a lot of different options here, a lot of different ways to customize your characters and have very different play styles. Every Adept is a ton of fun to use, and we will start off by talking about Gale. Gale is a 1/1 range physical class that is basically a Swordmaster from Fire Emblem, but like infused with Storm and Lightning magic, which is a ton of fun. You get Ravager Winds, apply heavy weak stacks to up to 6 enemies in a line that starts at 5. I do have an upgrade on that. This is obviously phenomenal, just be able to make a bunch of enemies weaker in general, make it so that they hit you less hard. So even as a dodgy class, you're still not going to take too much damage if there's a bunch of enemies and you take a hit or 2 from them. And then Stormborn, switching your damage type to magical or, you know, back again to physical if it's already magical. This is a really nice option as it keeps you completely versatile, dealing with any type of enemy on the battlefield, and it's a relatively cheap mana cost that can be made even cheaper with upgrades. You then have Turbine as your passive skill, deal 6 extra damage to weakened enemies. So hey, you can put down Ravager Winds, weaken a bunch of enemies, probably blow one up, and then tank the rest. Not too shabby. And the stats reflect that pretty well as well. It's an all-rounder job. It's great to have on the front line. It's not a tank, but it's not like a complete dodge tank either. It does a little bit of both. It does some physical, it does some magical. It's just an all-around good job that gets a fair number of crits as well, which is nice. Then, of course, we move on to Tempest, and it's pretty much just a straight upgrade in every single way. You get Gathering Storm, gain 9 crit for every enemy within 2 tiles, lasts for 2 attacks. So yeah, you can just walk into a group of enemies and say, bet, and have massive crit for 2 attacks to blow something up. And then Swift Winds, apply +2 movement to adjacent allies for 1 turn. This is obviously just great. Having extra mobility in any sort of strategy, tactic style game is always going to be very, very good for you. And just being able to say, hey, it's the start of the map, and I've got this position so that I've got like 4 allies around me before our first turn. Pop this and just sprint directly into the enemy. Then we get the passive skill Swift Strikes, damage of follow-up attacks increased by excess true speed. So once you've successfully doubled the enemy, any extra speed past that point is just going to get you more damage, which is pretty damn awesome. And again, the stats reflect that. So a very good frontline duelist type of class. You don't want to take too many hits with it, but it can suffer through a few, and it's likely going to deal a lot of damage in reprisal. Then moving on to our lightning mages, we have the Conduit, and this is definitely a fun one. Conduit starts off with Chain Lightning, deal damage, chaining to up to 3 enemies within 2 tiles, so just a nice way to do some AoE damage. And then the very powerful Defibrillate, healing an ally for a massive amount of HP, but applying light stun to them if they have basically more than like single digit or like death's door range health, right? You want to use this to restart someone's heart, and if their heart is already restarted, you'll still give them the heal, but they're going to be a little bit stunned afterwards, you know what I'm saying? Then we get the passive skill Flux Overload. Mana usage within 2 tiles increases crit by 6 until the next crit, which is very, very nice. Get yourself some nice big crit options. And of course, this is a 1/2 range magical class. The stats here are largely focused on dealing damage. It's not the fastest class around, and it's certainly not particularly durable, but it does have great mastery scaling as well. So this is definitely going to be probably your single biggest damage dealer in the group, and probably the biggest glass cannon as well compared to everything else. Certainly not a bad option. Stormkeeper itself is even more ridiculous. It gives you Lightning Strike, call lightning up to 8 tiles away, dealing massive damage in a 5-tile cross. This is going to be a nice chunky AoE ability. And then Storm Rider, reduce movement costs greatly in an 8-tile line for 1 turn. This one I've honestly been having a hard time figuring out. I believe it's just you use this on a bunch of allies, and then if you try to run them through rough terrain, like they don't get slowed down by it, but I've had a hard time really being able to test it, so if anyone has any particular insight into this one, do let me know. You then get the passive skill Obliteration. Overkill damage restores mana, which is obviously awesome if you're going to be out here throwing around lightning strikes and stuff. And we're still a 1/2 range magical class that generally wants to be dealing damage, not taking it. Moving on to what should be the tank of the team, but that kind of goes to Ascendant, which we'll talk about at the end of this section here. But let's talk about Frigillan first. Frigillan is a very interesting class. It uses axes, it's 1/1 range physical, and it's definitely the tankiest of them. You get good HP, good might, good defense, not particularly good speed, dex, or fortitude, though, and not particularly good mastery either. So basically, it's like, yeah, throw yourself out there and tank, right? Now, what's interesting is you get the Icy Spire ability. Creates an Icy Spire for 1 turn blocking movement. Okay, so you can put this down somewhere to just like block a choke point. Not the most useful thing you can be doing when you could just block the choke point with your body and kill stuff, but I mean, if for some reason you're not going to survive otherwise, you do have it there as an option. And then you get Defensive Stance. Apply severe block stacks to yourself. Now, this is definitely nice. It's a little pricey, but of course you can upgrade it so that it becomes less pricey. And getting that much block on yourself at that level of block is very strong. Like, it does make you very, very tanky, but that block also will fall off extremely quickly, and then, yeah, where are you at, you know? You then have the passive skill Defensive Fighter, gain 5 power and 25 accuracy, while block is active. So you basically always want to have what is essentially frost armor on, whether it comes from you or from someone else, and then you can deal more damage. But with the way the stats are distributed on this one, it kind of feels like you need to have that at all times to be able to deal damage consistently. And if you're tanking properly, then you're not going to have your block because you're using it to not take damage. It's kind of a weird one. It's kind of a weird one. But we'll move on to Godfrost. Godfrost is definitely more of the same, giving you absolute 0 for a whopping 90 mana, drop temperature, hardening your ice, and gaining 18 defense and fortitude for 2 turns. Now, this is better. Getting that big of a boost to your defense and your fortitude means that you are going to be one tanky mother, and that is exactly what this class wants. It is a massive mana cost, but you do get massive tankiness as a result. You then also get Frostlock, freeze an enemy's blood, applying 1 light stun. So, yeah, not terrible, not terrible. Being able to stun a priority target is always good, as we talked about with Lanky Spanky. And then Ice Incarnate. Using mana applies 2 light snared to enemies within 2 tiles. So you kind of like want to run into the enemy, tank some hits, like use your mana to, I guess, like increase your defense, and then snare enemies that are nearby. The issue with that, though, is like you've already used your mana running in, like, because you probably want to use absolute 0 to tank a whole bunch, then you won't have any mana to put the snare on things. Kind of a weird one, but just as a class, it can make itself extraordinarily tanky and then just slap back to deal damage to foes. It's certainly not a bad choice. It just feels a little anti-synergistic with its skills. Now, what does not feel anti-synergistic with its skills is Monk. Monk is awesome. This is also a 1/1 range physical job, and it is probably the most well-rounded stats-wise of all 4 in the Adept skill tree, or in the Adept class tree, and it has some very interesting abilities to go with it. First off, you get Charged Key, elevates the unit's key state, raising advanced stats by 14 for 2 turns, basically just making your other skills more effective. And then you get Key Blast, send a bolt of energy at an enemy within range, dealing pretty decent damage. And for the cheap cost, you can be throwing around energy blasts like you're straight out of DBZ, you know what I'm saying? Then as your passive skill, you get Nerve Strike. Attacks apply 5 heavy, weak stacks. So you actually get pretty tanky with this as well. Like, if you can get some good Nerve Strikes going on and just make the enemies not able to hit as hard for you or your allies, that's definitely a good option. But then we get to Ascendant, which, again, is more of the same. Your stats just all get better across the board. You're still 1/1 range physical, but you get 2 very powerful abilities. Key Lance, attack with key energy in a 5-tile line, dealing massive damage to any enemies. So a very nice long-range AoE snipe. And then Divine Flow. Become impossible to hit for, I believe it starts at 4 attacks. Just impossible. Just become impossible to hit. Flat out. There's a reason this costs 100 mana. It is disgustingly powerful, as I'm sure you can imagine. Just making it so that you can say no to anything that comes at you means that you're going to be able to attack back with no recourse to the enemy to do anything about it for so freaking long. Then you do have Elemental Fists, gain 25 dodge, accuracy, or crit, cycling with every attack. So, obviously, every 3rd attack, you're going to be getting your crits, so you'll get some big crits fairly often. The dodge and the accuracy are also nice, but the crit is really what you want to end on most of the time. This is just an overall very powerful frontline melee class. It's going to be tanky. It's going to be hard to hit, impossible to hit, actually, with Divine Flow. It has very good options for ranged damage. It's just an extremely strong option for any adept that you want to use. And now we move on to our 5th and final job tree, class tree, whatever you want to call it. I get them all mixed up now between all the different SRPGs that we've played. It is the one, the only Druid tree, and I love this tree. This one is so much fun. It's kind of like a continuation of Adept in a way, given some of the different like abilities and attacks and things that you get, but it's definitely more like shamanistic druidic magic, which is very, very fun. And we're going to be starting off by talking about the tank class here, Juggernaut. Juggernaut is definitely an interesting one. It has a little bit of a counter tank type thing going on with Wreathed in Flame. It's no repulsor shield, but it's certainly good for what it is, so let's talk about it. You get Absorb Pain, consume all active debuffs to heal for 16 each, so definitely not a bad way to keep yourself up if you've been getting hit by enemies that are putting debuffs on you, which can happen pretty frequently, especially on higher difficulties. And then you do get Wreathed in Flame, call flames, causing your next X attackers to take X amount of damage after combat. This does stack, so you can sit there and just spam Wreathed in Flame on yourself as long as you have the mana, and then watches enemies burn in Holy Hellfire every time they hit you, which is very fun. You then get Pain Absorption. Taking damage restores mana equal to damage taken, which is very, very nice. Makes it so you can just keep spamming things like Wreathed in Flame and Absorb Pain. And of course, this is a 1/1 range physical axe class. It's got very solid defensive stats overall. It's not the best class for Cassandra, but even then it did make her decently tanky for me when I ran her through the class on my first run. And for any other one of these types of characters who can access this tree who has better defensive stats, it is definitely going to be a very solid option for them. Then, of course, Dreadnought does more of the same. Still 1/1 range with axes, gets you some better stats overall, and you get some very nice abilities. With Dread Blessing, grant an ally your blessing, applying light block stacks, and then Bloodstroke, attack an enemy for 10 additional damage, increased by 1 for every 5 missing HP. And those breakpoints can be variable depending on what upgrades you have. Of course, with the Relentless passive skill, never misses, but cannot dodge, which is a ton of fun. Being able to just sit on the front line, take a shit ton of damage, and then being like, all right, my turn, with just like the bloody face and the maniacal grin and blood stroking for massive amounts of damage that they can't dodge. It is so much fun. It's a little bit of like a support tank class until you get a good blood stroke going on, and then you can get some huge single target damage. Definitely one of the more fragile tank options, I would say, but with the trade-off that you do have a little bit of that sort of berserker nature going on, which can definitely have its uses for sure. However, moving on, we have Waveseer, and this is definitely the most directly supporty of the different classes that are available in the Shaman, Druid, what have you class tree. It's definitely the most healing-focused one for sure, with Healing Wave. Heals up to 2 allies in a line for a certain amount, usually a fairly low amount, but I mean, it's got multiple targets, so like definitely not bad. And then Whirlpool, create a 3x3 Whirlpool that units cannot move out of for 1 turn. So if you really just want to say no to a group of enemies and make sure that they stay where they are or cannot move closer to you, you drop this Whirlpool and buy yourself some time, which is great if you need to like regen mana or things like that. And then you get Aquatic Affinity, mana costs reduced by 30%. So if these skills look like they might be a little bit on the pricey side, that's because you're actually going to be reducing it by 30%, so it's not nearly as bad as it looks. And of course, this is a 1/2 range magical focus class. Its stats are definitely not geared towards offense. You do get good speed, so you can be fairly dodgy. You get some decent mastery as well, but you do not want to be on the front line. You do not want to be taking hits, and you certainly are not trying to deal a ton of damage with the Waveseer. The Tidecaller is definitely a very interesting looking class with its water, like hair floating up in the not water that's above you. But it also has some very powerful abilities. First off, Chain Heal. Heals up to 3 allies for 23, chaining up to 3 tiles away. So you can get some really actually far distance healing going here. And then Restoring Waters to refresh an ally's turn. Yes. This is essentially your Dancer class. Now, of course, it is expensive mana-wise, although, as we know, you do have reduced mana costs with these classes, so like it's a little bit of give and take, but just being able to say, you, incredibly powerful champion, run in there and hit them again is really, really fun, especially if you just don't need the healing right then, and that other character's damage output is probably going to be better than your Tidecaller's damage output. Finally, of course, you do have your passive skill, Rising Tides. Ability use increases mastery by 4 till the end of the mission. So, as you're out here going through a mission, using your mana, supporting your allies, everything you're doing is just going to get better and better because you're just going to keep stacking mastery on yourself endlessly. So you can get some truly ridiculous healing and other things going on with this class, which is just a ton of fun. Absolutely phenomenal support class, a very fun one to use. Next, we have Elementalist, and this little tree here might be my favorite of the four in this. Ritualist is also really good, but Elementalist is just a ton of fun. This is definitely your big sort of support, but also casting for damage type of class, and we'll see what we have going on here now. First off, you get Ice Shield. Shield an ally with ice, applying heavy block stacks. This would go quite well with Frigillan, as I'm sure you can imagine. You get Flame Strike, which is your big damage ability, and one of the better damage abilities at this point in the game when you unlock it. Call a Pillar of Flame, dealing damage in a 5-tile AoE, so you can deal a lot of damage to a lot of enemies with this. And then you get Invoke Spirits, power increased by 4 after ability use until next combat. So, if you want, you can just be running around, burning mana, dealing damage to enemies, supporting allies, and then when it comes time for you to actually attack, with a bunch of power boosts, just nuke something, which is so much fun. The stats for this one are fairly well-rounded overall. You have decent offensive stats, decent defensive stats. It's definitely the most generalist of the classes here, and it can do a little bit of everything, especially depending on what character that you put the class on. Then as we move on to Spirit Keeper, this is where things get really nutty. I've done some stupid stuff with Spirit Keeper. 90 mana, Resurrection. Resurrect a dead player unit with up to 29 HP and 54 mana, of course scaling with things like Mastery. Yeah, this just brings someone back. If you have multiple characters down, then you don't know quite who it's going to bring back. I think it might just be the most recent one who died, but I'm not entirely sure of that. I have to test it. But still, just being able to be like, no, I will not, in fact, go the rest of this mission without this character, and, like, guarantee that they're going to be able to get their XP and, like, contribute to the fight and everything. It's so friggin' good, man. And then, of course, literally just Spirit Bomb. Unleash the power of spirits, dealing 36 damage in a 3x3 zone. Yeah, this is dumb. This one is really, really dumb in the best possible way. You can just nuke stuff. And with your passive skill, Soul Synergy, it's going to be even better. Combat increases effective next ability by 25%. So, you slap something in combat, and then on your turn, you just be like, even bigger Spirit Bomb. I love Elementalist and Spirit Keeper. It is a very fun, shamanistic, druidic damage-dealing class with some support abilities as well. I mean, one of the best support abilities in the game with Resurrection if you're someone who likes to let your character die. Like, it's just a super fun one, and as a 1/2 range magical class, of course, it can be very versatile. Finally, our last one here, the oh-so-alluring Blood Mage Ritualist. I know this is friend of the channel, Link King's favorite class, I believe, at this point, especially on Cassandra. He made a truly disgusting Cassandra with it, and it is definitely a very good choice for her. Let's go through what it does, shall we? First off, you get Transfusion. Apply 13 severe bleed stacks, chaining to 2 additional targets within 2 tiles. So this is just going to be giving you free damage when anything does anything to those targets, which is going to be absolutely phenomenal. And as a blue skill, like, you can use it and then still attack, which is great. And then Hex an enemy, applying heavy weak stacks if you just need to make sure that something doesn't hit you hard. And Blood Mage, attacks heal equal to enemy bleed stacks. If you have a bleed-heavy team, you can make it so difficult to actually kill your Ritualists because they will just heal. And because they do have pretty decent offensive stats, their attacks are going to be dealing pretty decent damage, that is then complemented by the bleed stacks that are going to be on them that you're also healing off of. Like, you can deal a disgusting amount of damage to enemies, clear huge swaths of the enemy board, and pretty much come out unscathed, which is awesome. This is, of course, a 1/2 range Daggers magical class, so you're able to attack at close or long range, making that sort of drain tanking even easier. And that's before we even get into the one, the only, the Hemomancer. Soul Tear. Rip at an enemy's soul, dealing damage for every severity stage of debuff they are inflicted with. Whew. Just be out here, like, curse maxing on things, right? Just absolutely hexing the crap out of things. And then literally just suck their soul out through all the different wounds you've inflicted on their body. It's so hysterically cool. I love this ability. And then you get Simulacrum. Create a Simulacrum of an enemy at a percentage of their stats. So you can just create a dummy of an enemy and be like, you are mine now. I'm now going to kill you with your own clone. It's so hysterically cool. And then, of course, you have to round it out with Dark Magic. Power and crit increased by 1 for every 5 missing HP. So, you know, you just get stronger as you get weaker, which is always a classic. And then if, you know, you're doing some drain tanking shenanigans, well, all the better. So, yeah, it's Hemomancer is just a, like, ridiculously good class. It's right up there with Spirit Keeper as very strong, kind of utility, damage-dealing magical classes for the druidic shamanistic range. Absolutely excellent option and probably one of the strongest, just objectively strongest classes in the game. So you gotta love that. And that, my friends, is your overview of every class in Dark Deity 2 that you have access to. Obviously, there's enemy-exclusive classes. But for the playable classes, that is your general overview. This one went on far, far longer than I intended it to, so my apologies for that. I'll try to trim it down as best I can. If you have any questions about anything to do with any of these classes or any of these skills, I would love to field them in the comments down below. Either I'll be able to help you out or another commenter will be able to help you out, so feel free to ask away down there. And tell me what your personal favorite class or combination of classes is in Dark Deity 2. Obviously, we did not have the chance to talk about like build crafting and the combination of like a one tier 2 class with a different tier 3 class outside of its direct promotion path, and like how you can get different synergies going on with that type of thing, all that type of good stuff. There's a ton to discuss with this, but for now, if you just wanted to know how the classes work and what their general role is, here you are. Until the next time, of course, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.